Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. Well, I'm very excited for today's recording because we are talking about something that we haven't really discussed in a while. We're doing an episode of Creator's Notes. And I'm really excited to talk about this specific topic. And you can probably tell by the t-shirts that you see here. We obviously know the topic of discussion. But anyway, my fellow That's Comical colleague, Cami, is here. Cami, I'm really hoping that you're excited for tonight's recording.
I've been looking forward to this all week. I am so excited to be here. You know I am excited. And how are you doing today?
Doing all right. It's been a very interesting week, but we pulled through, and that's the most important thing. We're still here. So, I'm really glad that we're going to be doing this episode of Creator's Notes because we've been doing a little bit of celebrating of this specific topic because even when we were going into a lot of the episodes where we were dedicating it to the 85th anniversary of Batman, we still haven't really tackled the fact that we're also celebrating the 40th anniversary of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And there's so much to discuss when it comes to this franchise, and I felt that the only way to do this correctly, even though we are going to be doing a couple more Ninja Turtles things before the year is over, I felt that doing a Creator's Notes episode about Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird was the only way that we could do this correctly, because when you are able to define a name and attach it to only one major franchise, that's either a blessing or a curse. But I think it's usually a blessing because when someone mentions Adam West, you think of Batman. When someone says Christopher Reeve, you think Superman. In the world of comics, if someone says Chris Claremont, you're obviously talking about the X-Men franchise and some of the more popular and legendary X-Men stories that came out, like the Dark Phoenix saga. But when you say the names Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, even though there are so many people that have never picked up a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comic book, you always know that it's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that we're talking about.
And that's the beauty of it. I mean, really, if you think about the inception of this to where we are now, I mean, I started this when I was a kid, and to know that all these years later, I'm still talking about it. I mean, that says something. That's something that's very impressionable on its fans, that we can carry this through multiple decades. And it truly is, and I've heard multiple people in the circuit that was attached to some form of this franchise say it truly was lightning in a bottle. I mean, if you really look at how epic it was from the inception of the first comic book to the creation of the toy line and the movies and all the things that we're going to talk about here, it really is incredible just how many people are attached to the legacy of this brand.
And I think what's even more impressive is how long this brand has lasted, because this name, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, has gone through the ringer and so many trials and tribulations. There were points in time where nobody even wanted to touch this franchise. And the fact that, it went from ultimate highs to massive competition with another major franchise that is ironically still standing to this very day. And that's unfortunate. That is a topic that I think you in April we can talk about, because I may know a little bit about Power Rangers, but nowhere near as much as you two. But there was a competition there, and at one point in time, the Turtles were almost non-existent, and then fast forward into the 2000s, all of a sudden they're back, and then there's cartoons, there's movies again, there's video games, there's action figures. They're back, and now it's plain to see they're not going away. And that makes me very happy to know that 40 years later, everybody's parent has always said when their child gets into something new and exciting, there's that one line that always comes out of a parent. Deny it, parents. I'm a parent myself. Deny it up and down. You know that you have heard it, and you know that one day you're going to say it. When your child is on the newest and biggest thing, you're going to say, Oh God, that's not going to last long. My mom said that to me about Green Day and said that to me about The Simpsons. And look at where Green Day and The Simpsons are today. The
Right.
Green Day is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and The Simpsons are the longest running animated sitcom in television history. I think at this point, almost the longest running syndicated TV show in American history. So that says something. So you must never doubt it, ever.
It's funny that you say that though, because I remember running home and telling my mom about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and she's like, "Mutant Ninja, what? And why do you like this?" And my mom never questioned anything that I started to enjoy, or that I stumbled across. But the fact that none of my toys were ever gender specific. I was always very gender neutral when it came to my toys. So the fact that I could run home from the playground and tell my mom, I need a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, and she obliged, was awesome. And I think that if more parents would just kind of give in to whatever their child's imagination is gearing towards at that time, we would have a lot more creative children, because there's so many parents. And even as the creation of this franchise was developing, as we kind of moved from comics into the toys, there was a lot of parents that were kind of just like, I'm not buying you, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, whatever you just said, and it's unfortunate, because I hear that a lot too when it comes to reading with kids, and if you stop kids from reading what they're going to enjoy, they're not going to be lifelong readers. They're going to stop right then and there. So I just think it's such a cool thing to know that these turtles that were introduced to ooze in the sewer became like the coolest thing ever, and it's still cool today.
We got to go back to, that shared apartment in New Hampshire where Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, they met and they had a dream. And the dream was to create a comic book. And of course, one of their inspirations, I know Kevin Eastman says this all the time when he's interviewed, that he wanted to be the next Jack Kirby, which is a really hard thing to do when you take a look at Jack Kirby and you see all the amazing things that he created as a comic book artist and writer.
Before we go on from that, though, I mean,
Mhm.
we really need to pay homage to Jack Kirby
Of
in the
course.
franchise itself, because honestly speaking, that is what connected Peter and Kevin instantly, is the fact that Peter Laird had that cell on his wall that was a Jack Kirby original. And as soon as Eastman and him had their first encounter with each other, Eastman came over to discuss his portfolio, he immediately locked eyes on that Kirby drawing, and he's like, "Oh my God, I've never seen a real one in person." And Laird knew in that moment, okay, we've got something special here because we have this bond. And then, as the comic book kind of transcended into what we know now, that first early edition, a lot of people say that some of those drawings are really a nod to Jack Kirby. Of course, it was kind of like, oh well, is this a play on Jack Kirby? Are they making fun of it? But they were really just honoring his drawings, but giving it their own style. So Jack Kirby should get a lot of credit when it comes to Laird and Eastman and their collaboration.
Jack Kirby needs a creator's notes episode,
I
especially
would love
considering,
that.
well, listen, he's one of my celebrity birthday buddies, and he's probably the one that I'm the most proud of. So, I mean, considering the fact that I also share a birthday with Honey Boo Boo, I mean, I'll take Jack Kirby over Honey Boo Boo any day of the week. My wife will never let that go. But
I
no,
wouldn't
Jack
either.
Kirby is truly he is, if not the greatest comic book creator to ever grace his presence in this world. And yes, he does deserve all the credit for so many things, even though there were so many things that were taken away from him, no thanks to another creator who is unfortunately so much more liked these days. And unfortunately, you don't know the whole story. I'm talking about Stan Lee, by the way. But anyway, yeah, there's a whole piece of Stan Lee that we do not need to get into now, but it's one thing that not that many people talk about. But anyway, so Kevin Eastman always talks on his interviews that, he just wanted to draw Jack Kirby everything. And when he told his mother that he wanted to be a comic book creator, she and his father were like, oh, great, we're stuck with this kid forever. And, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird getting together and trying to create a comic book, they came into the industry at the perfect time. because the comic book industry was going through a major change. Not just that, pop culture was really going through a major revolution because we're talking about a time when comic books were starting to ditch the camp and go back to their dark roots. We hadn't gotten some of the greatest things from Frank Miller or Alan Moore or Neil Adams just yet. But, you know, we were heading into a time when there was creativity at its peak. The movies that were coming out, the music that was being released, the cartoons that were actually coming out at the time. And that's another really interesting thing because you mentioned that your toys were gender neutral, and yet the 80s was a time where cartoons and toys were gender specific. Boys
Absolutely.
had to watch He-Man, girls had to watch She-Ra. Boys had to watch Thundercats, girls watched Strawberry Shortcake. You know, there really weren't that many animated shows, maybe like the Smurfs or Muppet Babies, that really both genders actually were willing to sit down and watch regardless.
Well, and of course I was introduced to all those feminine type shows, My Little Pony, all of that. However, I think the beauty of a Saturday morning was that you got cartoons back to back to back. So regardless if you showed up for Strawberry Shortcake, you were still going to be exposed at some point to He-Man, I mean, it was inevitable. And yeah, sometimes I would be like, ew, I don't want to watch that. That's a boy cartoon, But then there were some times where there was that boy cartoon that just really resonated with me. And I was like, oh, I like this. And I love the fact that my mom never stopped it from happening. There's just so many parents that stop it from happening because they're afraid of the results. And it's like, why? It's entertainment. That's what it's here for
And it's
across the
not just
board.
that. And the other thing was, at this time period, this was also when martial arts was starting to be the in thing again. I mean, we hadn't really seen a passion for martial arts in popular culture since the late Bruce Lee at the time. But now you're seeing, especially in 1984, you get a certain movie coming out called The Karate Kid, and everybody absolutely loves it. And martial arts is coming back into popularity. So these two guys are just trying to figure out what to do because they're looking at all the stuff that's come before them and everything seems to have already been done. So they just decided, we love all this stuff. Let's create an anthropomorphic animal. What anthropomorphic animal would be the exact unlikely animal to be a fast-moving, ninja-skilled warrior? And then they drew that very first drawing of Michelangelo, that turtle with the nunchucks in his hand and the bandana, and they laughed at it. They laughed and they laughed and they laughed. And then they looked at that drawing again like the next day and said, wait a second, we may have something here.
And it's funny
Yeah.
because the conversation also began before the turtle was even drawn about a bus. They kept talking about what inevitably ended up being the turtle van. And they kept, coming back to like, oh, okay, it's spinning. Like, what do we do with this? And then it was almost as though Eastman created the turtle just to kind of piss Laird off, like, let me draw this like really ridiculous thing just to see what he thinks. But then the fact that Laird had such a positive affirmation when he saw it, he's like, you know what? I think you need a little bit more to this. What if we added Teenage Mutant to your Ninja Turtles? And I think we kind of got something here. And I love that, that something that was intended to just be funny.
It literally was like, it seemed to be like an instant thing to them. Like,
Absolutely.
not everything comes easy. I mean,
Mhm.
George Lucas, he had that idea to create Star Wars, but he had to take the time to put all of those intricate pieces together in his story. I still think one of his most hilarious interviews was after I wrote the whole story of Star Wars, because originally all three of the original trilogy were one movie, and he realized that he wasn't going to be able to have that long story, so he had to split it up. And then he said, after I wrote the original trilogy, I had to write my backstory. So he put so much time and effort into creating this world. Eastman and Laird, they had a world to create, but it was a lot more simpler to create because just putting those four turtles together, making them brothers living in the sewers of New York City, giving them the names of Renaissance painters. Everything, I mean, once you've gotten to that point, everything else just falls into place. Let's make their ninja master a mutant rat. Let's give them a human friend in April O'Neil. Let's give them the most coolest enemy that we could think of in the Shredder and the Foot Clan. And it's just incredible how easily it was to put everything together. But oh man, did they not know if this book was going to sell?
Well, and think about it. Their first comic book came out in October of '83. And when they put it out, they actually killed off the character, the main character, because they didn't think that anybody was going to take this seriously. 3,000 original copies ended up selling out, and they were like, well, crap, now what are we going to do? And so Eastman just said, you know what, let's just make volume 2 and see what happens. And the next one was, so much bigger. It was like 115,000 copies or something like of that nature. And, comic book store owners at that time were just saying it was incredible to watch who was coming in and buying this, So obviously they had something. And I think that as we look at the different comic books that came out, since the initial creation, we just see such a deeper dive into the backstory of Master Splinter and Shredder. And, it's just been so cool to watch Eastman and Laird give us the depth of these characters. At first it was just kind of passe, like we don't even think this is going to be a thing. And now we just know, from their original origin stories, where it all started and why it is what it is. And it's been an incredible journey to watch that unfold. I mean, and then you get even some whimsical stories like our new modern Saturday morning cartoons, so it's just fun. The whole franchise is just so much fun, and it speaks to so many different individuals in so many different eras, and it's
Yeah.
great.
And I also once again feel that it was because of the fact that that 1984 was the year that it was. You even think about some of the other things that were going on in popular culture, like movies like Ghostbusters are coming out. You can't get more creative than a movie like Ghostbusters. And so also the fact that this is a book that comes out on their own indie label in Mirage Comics. It's like, if it's not one of the big two, is anybody going to buy it? In the case of 1984, absolutely, because people are looking for something different. People are looking for something new. People are trying to get out of that campy world that unfortunately the Comics Code Authority had to be forced to create, which led to the Silver Age of comics. Not saying that the Silver Age of comics is an iconic time, but the fact that you had to stay within that bubble through the Bronze Age and into the early stages of the modern age, it's really hard to keep your audience if you're not getting the fact that the comic book industry had to forcefully spin their wheels because they couldn't go darker. Now, granted, there were some times where Marvel and DC into the 70s did get into those darker stories, like the death of Gwen Stacy in Spider-Man, or the Dark Phoenix saga in the early 1980s over at X-Men. There were some people that were trying to break those molds, but it was really, really risky. But it wasn't so risky in the 1980s because people were looking for something different. And if you go on an indie label, you have a little bit more liberty and you have a bigger sandbox to play in. And you're absolutely right. 3,000 copies of a single book, you wonder who's going to be picking that up. It could have, because this is also the time where there's no internet. So you don't have all of these places that are giving you all of this news. You walk into the store, or in this case, there really weren't that many comic shops. You walked into your local grocery store, or you walked into your local drugstore, and you went and saw the little spinning comic book rack, and you saw this book, because I see that cover all the time. And
It's a beautiful cover.
It's an iconic cover. It's simple, it's crude, but it stands out. It's iconic. So people who see this book in 1984 are saying, "What is this? I'm interested in this."
And just to kind of go back for a second, so the audience doesn't think I'm a dunce, because I did say 1983, but that was the creation of it. I know that the comic book didn't come out until October 1984, but in 1983 they were sitting in their home in Maine and they were creating, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and then it finally popped off. But I think also the success of that first comic book was the fact not only that the audience was looking for something different, but when you look at the original cover of the first issue, it's gritty, and so it still does have a dark feel to it. And I think that for me as a comic book enthusiast, when I'm looking for a new read, I'm a cover buyer, and so if it looks gritty, if it looks like it could potentially have some darkness to it, it's a definite pickup for me. And I can only imagine, if I would have seen that original at the age I am now, of course, because at the time it came out I was only 3, but it would have just spoken to me, because it would have been like, this is gritty, this is dark, this is one color, and these are 4 turtles. Like, what is their story?
I don't think it's ever going to happen, but if they ever decided to make a facsimile edition of issue number 1, I'd love to just have a copy of it just to actually like see the full-on print in all its glory. I mean, I've got myself a collection of the graphic novels, which basically encompasses all the best of the original TMNT run over at Mirage, but I haven't read them yet. But I also really am amazed that, a book like that, especially the first issue, is so valuable to this very day. I mean, I remembered I don't watch it on TV, but every now and again I like to go on YouTube and watch Pawn Stars, and I love when they bring comic books in. And one guy brought in his own copy of TMNT number 1, first printing, signed by Kevin Eastman. They actually brought Kevin Eastman onto the show to make sure that his signature was right, that it actually was his signature. But I love when they brought Steve Houston in, their comic book expert, and he said about that book, I remember when this book came out. I laughed at this book. I didn't care about this book. I didn't buy it, and it became the biggest thing in the world. So you and I discovered the Ninja Turtles in a completely different way, pretty much as how every 80s child pretty much got exposed to the Ninja Turtles, and that was the animated series that started in 1987.
Yes.
What's so interesting about that whole part of the story is obviously this was also a time when if you were making a toy line, you have to have a cartoon to go with that toy line. So, of course, the toy line was coming first. And I watched The Toys That Built America with that episode of the Ninja Turtles and the Power Rangers. And I could not believe the guy who just kept knocking on Eastman and Laird's door saying, I like your comic book. I want to make an action figure line. I want this to be a TV show. I want this to be the greatest thing in the world. And
That was Mark Friedman, and
exactly, I knew his last
the
name was Friedman.
but the funny thing about that, when he knocked, I love his backstory, because he'll tell you that his suit was rented, his car was rented, and he was just going off, a chance on a whim. And Eastman just looked at him and he's like, "Yeah, great, dude. Thanks for stopping by, but you're not the first guy to approach us with this idea." He's like, "Look, we'll give you 30 days. If you come back after 30 days and you tell us, you've got something, you've got a good price, we might consider a second meeting with you." But I mean, can you imagine just how interesting? And then to boot, he got to leave with a original copy of the first comic book and a 4-foot foam. I think it was I don't even think it was designated like a specific turtle, because at that time they hadn't, obviously picked the color. So it was just still the red bandana. And he's walking around like, well, now I got this big foam figure that I can take to all these different toy companies and say, look, this is my vision. And I'm just like, oh my God. And he still to this day has that foam figure. Of course, it's deteriorated a little bit, like the teeth are missing on one side, but it's fabulous. I mean, just think about that. If you had the go knock on Laird and Eastman's, Mirage studio door and say, hey, this is what I want to do, just have some faith in me. I love Mark Friedman, and I absolutely love his enthusiasm for the Turtles.
Yeah, he reminds me very much of Ray Kroc's story when he went to the McDonald's brothers in San Bernardino, California. He's like, there's something here. You're not doing what you should be doing with this thing. And
I think he was the confidence booster that Eastman and Laird needed. They were very proud of their product, but they weren't going out and trying to market it. And Friedman had that marketability for them, and it was a great pairing.
same time, you know, there's always fear. Kevin Eastman and Laird, there's one thing that you never want is you never want your baby to be stolen from you and to turn it into something that it really isn't. Because again, look at those comic books. They're not kid friendly. They're dark, they're gritty, they're not even in color. They're in black and white at the beginning. But
Yeah.
you know what? Mark Friedman sold them at some point in time. And I still remember when I saw the very first commercial for the action figures. And I'm like, what is this? I'm like, I need to know, what is this? That's exactly what I was like. I was stunned. I was in I was in awe and encapsulated by this thing because I'm like, anthropomorphic. I'm not even saying the word anthropomorphic at age 7 or 8, but I'm just looking at these things and I'm like, these talking, walking Ninja Turtles. I'm like, what is this? I want to know more about this. And then when they announced that a cartoon was coming, I was like, forget it. Now I really want to watch this show. And the thing I love so much about the cartoon was, yes, did it take the turtles into a different direction? Oh, it
Oh
absolutely
yeah,
did.
absolutely.
But also, it gave the turtles more likability, more personality, and there were things that the cartoon and the action figure line gave us that the comic books didn't give us. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but Superman can fly because of the radio show and the George Reeves television show. Before that, he didn't fly in the comic books.
Right.
The turtles didn't eat pizza or have all of these turtle you know what until the cartoon came out.
And we can thank David Wise for that, because that was all his vision. He was very adamant about making them whimsical. He was very adamant about adding in these teenage fun elements to these turtles and giving them very distinct personalities. Him along with John Handy, they kind of, just kind of paired these ideas and thoughts. And, when they went to the drawing board and they conceptualized, how do we make this marketable for kids? I think that was kind of the awakening moment for Eastman. Eastman was a little bit apprehensive because, of course, the comic book is his baby. He sees all this kind of crazy cartoonish antics. Even when they were kind of making the different characters, the side characters and the villains and stuff, he was like, okay, well, it gets to a point where it's just a little bit stupid, But that's what sells to us as kids. We want the stupid, we want the campy because it's funny, and that's what will sell the toys. And I think when Eastman kind of let go of the reins a little bit and just let Wise and Handy, and there was a couple other people on that vision board as well, but say, okay, I'm going to trust in this. Let's see what happens. I don't think he realized what was about to happen.
Yeah, because those first 5 episodes, they were the test run and they slaughtered in the ratings. Like kids absolutely love it, boys and girls alike. So I was saying, like, at the beginning of the 80s, cartoons were gender based. I've said this to people, the Ninja Turtles was the cartoon, maybe next to DuckTales, if anything, that basically got boys and girls to sit down and watch the same show together, regardless of gender and like what's appropriate for that person. Because the Turtles has a little something for everyone. Everybody loves them. And then, they get that deal with Archie Comics, to create a whole series of Archie books based around the way that they're featured um in the cartoon, and it just goes uphill from there. I mean, it's the word turtle mania is a part of the lexicon literally the next year. It's insane how fast, like, they literally were bigger than the Beatles at one point in time. It is insane at how this little idea, with the right people who had such a passion for it, to take Eastman and Laird's creations to the next level. And based on what I read, if I'm wrong, Cami, please let me know. It seems that as things were really starting to blow up, it was Laird that still was like a little bit more hesitant and just really didn't want like the whole spotlight on him all the time. I think Eastman got a little bit more interested and involved in it than Peter Laird did.
I wouldn't say so much on the creation when it came to like the Playmates line of toys. He was very much involved, but where Laird did definitely take a step back was when we went into the movie franchise, because they had asked Eastman and Laird to do cameos in those, you know, because obviously it was their baby. Eastman was all for it. I mean, he does the iconic Trash Man scene, which we're now finally, after all these years, we're getting an action figure of Eastman as the Trash Man.
Oh,
I
that's
was
great.
floored. It's gonna be awesome. I think it's a NECA, but I'm not 100% sure. But it was in that moment that Laird just said, you know, this isn't really me. And if you really you know the history of Laird as an individual, he is very reserved, and people will say that anybody that's worked with them, to include their own artists, you know, Lawson and Levine and Brown and Dooney, you know, the early days of Mirage Studios, will say Eastman was always the powerhouse. He was always the goofball, you know, he was just very very much of the in charge kind of person. You know, not to say like in charge, they definitely take co-creator rights, but Laird was reserved, and they always say that, you know, he was very reserved, he was very introverted, but he was also very intelligent. And it, you know, no matter what presence Eastman brought to the table, the TMNT franchise would not be what it is if it wasn't for Laird. He is equally just as important
Absolutely.
as Eastman. You know, you can be
Absolutely.
quiet, but you can be creative.
Yeah, and then of course, you get into Turtle Mania, and you can't turn a corner without seeing something that is Ninja Turtles related. I mean, I don't know what the Ninja Turtles did for national pizza sales, but I definitely know that Pizza Hut really captured their worth on what the Turtles became, because it's like, if you went into a clothing store, you would see Ninja Turtles t-shirts. If your kid was having a birthday party and there was going to be pizza, you knew that all the party plates and cups and napkins were going to be Ninja Turtles. It was impossible not to have that. But then you take a look at just how many other directions these guys went in. I mean, forget the cartoon, forget the Archie books. Think about the fact that the Ninja Turtles revolutionized the side-scrolling button masher game, because at this point in time, Nintendo was almost in every other household. I think there were more Nintendos in American households than there were personal computers at the time. When I saw that Ninja Turtles arcade game, I was floored by the graphics. It literally looked like the cartoon was on a video game screen. That video game blew my mind, and I could never play it when it first came out because there was always another kid that was playing it. And my God, these kids would not stop. Like, they would have fistful of quarters ready to go into the next round because they wanted to beat Bebop and Rocksteady together. But then,
Well,
when
and
it,
that's
yeah,
why it became so popular on NES, because, you know, you would walk into an arcade and you would have this kid who was obviously older than you, and you would see their stacks of quarters and you were like, well, man, I'm never going to get to play this today. So when we finally got a home entertainment system, it was like, okay, yes, now I can finally play. And there's no way you can mention the TMNT franchise without talking about that game. Even if you're not a gamer, that revolutionized gaming completely. I mean, it is still talked about to this day how epic it is. I have I have a copy of it because they just recently re-released it in a bundle for their
oh yeah, the
anniversary.
Cowabunga collection.
Yes, and I'm thrilled to have it because, you know, it's a part of Turtle history.
Yeah, and even that horrible first Nintendo game, that underwater level, still gives people nightmares to this very day.
It's funny that you have those scenes from those early edition video games that still haunt us to this day. We're just like, man, that one scene. And it's funny because then other people, again, whether you're a gamer or not, you can relate because you played the game at least once.
Yeah, when I had my Nintendo, I had the second game, which obviously was the arcade game, but I was such a fan of TMNT 3, the Manhattan Project. I loved that
Oh,
game.
that's awesome. Yeah,
That
the
is one of my
graphics are
personal
so cool.
favorite games. Such a great game. But then the Bit Wars starts. You get new games on the Sega Genesis and on the Super Nintendo. The Super Nintendo is the version of Turtles in Time, which, what's really great about that version? I think the Super NES version of Turtles in Time is its own special thing because of the fact that it has additional characters and different styles of levels as opposed to the original arcade game. What I like about the original arcade game is the bosses are all bosses that were not in the first one. So I really
Right.
liked that. But of course, the other thing that did happen in this time was we did get the movie. And the 1990 film, I mean, of course, when you're able to get the Jim Henson Creature Shop attached to a movie that's going to be so complex in terms of puppeteering, you
Mhm.
know, you could not ask for a better person. It was his last great film. And I personally feel that was so interesting was this was the highest grossing independent film in 1990. It's crazy.
Absolutely.
And it's a great
Yeah,
movie
and
too.
I mean we got this beautiful creation by Fred Wolf for the animation, and so when the idea was brought to the table to create these movies, everybody was like, okay, how are we going to do this? And there's just so much rich history that goes into the costumes and the actors, and it's a really incredible backstory if you just study the movies alone. And we've talked about it, we've had a conversation about all the movie franchise before, but what I think is so incredible is that it wouldn't have been the magic that it was if Jim Henson wouldn't have gotten involved. And he was apprehensive because it was a little violent. He was like, I don't know if I want this to be attached to my legacy and my history and all of that. And I'm so glad that he changed his mind, because we honestly wouldn't have the quality of films that we have if it wasn't for his imagination and allowing us to use his magic.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I loved about the movie, especially the first movie, is the fact that it really was a beautiful blend of the original Mirage story and the 1980s cartoon. The fact that they were able to bring the two worlds together in such a great way and create such a fantastic, fantastic movie. I mean, I have to be honest with you. I know that there's two more, one that most Turtle fans do not speak of, but I, over time, am not really as big of a fan of the other two as I am of the first one. And I think that that's just because of the fact that, like the cartoon, it broke away a little too much from the violence and it made it a little too goofy and a little too campy because there was a lot of fighting in the first 5 episodes of Ninja Turtles. They actually use their weapons. As the show goes on, they really don't use their weapons that much to actually fight. Like they don't really throw punches as the show goes on. And that show lasted for 10 years, which is incredible. But even in the second film, they don't really do much actual fist fighting. And that's something that makes the Turtles the Turtles. Another thing that we also have to give a lot of tribute to is all the great voice casting that was added to these franchises. I mean, Cam Clark, the great Rob Paulson, you get Corey Feldman, Brian Tashi, Robbie Rist, you get so many, the late James Avery.
I was gonna
You
say,
have
if you don't
so,
say it, I'm saying it,
no,
because
no, no,
come
no, no.
on.
I was not going to forget Uncle Phil, okay? But the fact that we have all of these great actors that were part of this franchise, and also Judith Hoag and Elias Koutsalis, like all of these great names that were part of Turtle Mania is also just what makes them all the more special.
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned those voice actors, because I come to appreciate them so much more in my adult years, because you don't realize how many dual hats they held in those early days. Like Barry Gordon was Bebop and Donatello. And it's cool to see that talent of voice fluctuation and just how much thought they put into what that character should sound like, how the presence of that character should be.
How about the fact that Kevin Clash is the voice of Splinter, but he was also the voice of Elmo on Sesame Street?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, there is a lot of times not enough credit, in my opinion, that goes into giving these animated voice actors, because without that magic in their vocals, we wouldn't have the characters that we have. It's one thing to draw them and bring them to screen. It's another thing to create, this beautiful imagery of flat lays and cartoons, and there's a whole evolution of cartoons. But the voice is really what solidifies the character. It makes the character memorable. And when we look back and we think about our beloved characters, those humans go hand in hand with that character, and we love them just as much as the character they voiced.
Yeah. So along with the good, we also have to. I mean, you also have to remember at this time there was even a rock concert featuring the Ninja Turtles.
Oh, I had totally forgot about that until I kind of started, just like gathering my thoughts for our conversation. Yes, it was like a whole Broadway spectacle. And it's funny because a big part of TMNT history for the gentlemen that were responsible for that Broadway production, they have a tie-in to El Paso because they have a discussion about it in the 30th anniversary, the movie that came out, and the definitive history of the TMNT. And they're talking about, well, we had a show in Texas somewhere. They couldn't name the town. Well, it was El Paso, but to bide the time while they were waiting for the show to start, they actually went over to Juarez, Mexico, to a pizza, no, to an ice cream place. And I remember that on the nightly news, making history for us, in our area, because they were standing on the rooftop of this ice cream joint throwing pizza at the crowd. Because these kids didn't, make it across the border to go to this event because it was sold out, but they didn't want them to miss out because there was such a huge turtle mania everywhere. I mean, in every country. So they were like, you know what? Juarez is right there. Let's just go across the border. And at that time, it was a very different place in America. You could cross the border. There wasn't, a passport checks and all that. And they went to this ice cream place, and they said there was just as many kids and parents that turned out there that did for the Broadway spectacle at our what is it? I can't even, it was our event center, but it had a name. Anyways,
A community center?
no, it's like the one only place in El Paso that we have events. I think it's the Civic Center. Anyways, it's been a minute since I've done anything there, so it's not like jumping into my brain. But I just vividly remember after listening to them talk about that event, how it recollected watching the nightly news, and I was like, oh my God, look at all this turtle mania, that's here at home. It's super cool, and it's part of my history of the TMNT.
Right. And so, it's also incredible because as fast as Turtle Mania exploded, it was also very surprising by how quickly the bubble did burst. Because when you go further into the 90s, you see all of these new things that are coming out and new trends catching on, and how they tried to keep the Turtles still relevant because, you had the Power Rangers come out around that time, and they still tried to make some movies, and the third film was a massive box office bust. And then you take a look at the fact that Batman the Animated Series came out. So they tried to make the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles television show a little darker during its last 3 seasons. You take a look at the fact that in the world of video games, the button masher wasn't big anymore. Now it was all about Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat and Virtua Fighter. So they made tournament fighters. So you basically saw that they were trying to keep their heads above water because they were suddenly seeing that the Turtles really weren't the it thing anymore. And another desperate thing they tried to do was try and get a new comic book series going. One that was a little bit more like the Mirage series, because the Archie series had already finished up. But at that point in time, it's crazy to say it, that the Turtles just didn't seem to be wanted anymore. Nobody wanted them anymore. Video games, movies, comic books, the comic book line. I still remember in the mid-90s when there was a brand new Ninja Turtles #1. It didn't really have Eastman and Laird attached to it, and people didn't buy it. And I think it was just because of the fact that, something so big just got so annoying way too quick.
think that so much. I think that you have to understand, looking back at the 80s and looking back at everything we were subjected to in terms of television shows and cartoons. And I mean, anybody, I guess, can kind of say this happened in the 90s and the early 2000s also. But I think in the 80s, we were really just enriched with a lot all of a sudden. So it was really hard for kids to be engrossed in something for a lengthy period of time, and we were too young to be engrossed in the comics, and the comics had their run. And Laird says this perfectly. It just got to a point where they became so separated because of the business aspect of it and the comic side of things, that they just weren't seeing eye to eye anymore. They weren't really friends anymore. They were just kind of business partners. They were operating on opposite ends of the United States, East Coast, West
He
Coast.
wanted to go to Hollywood.
Yeah, well, I mean, they just, it made sense for him because he was also doing another magazine at the time. And it's understandable that business relationships, no matter how amazing they are, at some point are going to fizzle, and you kind of have to give yourself a break. So I think that inevitably the break that happened between Laird and Eastman really is what fueled the fire for the next leg of the TMNT. It also, though, paved way for franchises like the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Batman the Animated Series, because it gave kids an opportunity to kind of grow up with a darker feel of cartoons, and another thing to kind of be interested in, other toy lines and such things. But when TMNT made their comeback, we were ready for it because we were like, oh, now it's Eastman and Laird again. What do they have to give us? And I think that's the beauty of this franchise, is that it's had its highs and lows over the last 40 years, but every time it's come back with a bang, and to some degree, and we
Yeah.
get excited.
Yeah, I think the other thing that was also very interesting is when you also take a look at the 1980s, especially, take a look at the kind of music that was happening at the time. It was very flashy, very lighthearted, very
Oh,
happy-go-lucky, Michael
you
Jackson,
you
Madonna.
went pop, I went hair bands in my
No, no, no,
head.
no, even the hair I was gonna say, even the hair bands were just fun. Then when you get into
Yeah,
the 90s, it's all grunge. It's
yeah.
Alice in Chains, it's Nirvana, it's Pearl Jam, it's Soundgarden, it's all of those dark, gloomy, rough around the edges. And that was everything the Turtles were not at the time, you know? So when they tried to get back to their roots in the 90s, it was just really hard because when people were going to talk about the Ninja Turtles, they always went back to the cartoon because that's the one that most people at the time remember. Because again, I think that was probably the worst thing about the Turtles in their history. And I think that's also the reason why the Turtles had gone into that downward spiral and that they had to take that break for just a little bit of time because the people who knew and loved the Turtles were not people who remembered the comics. When you take a look at a comic book movie, the best comic book movies are the movies that people don't even realize they're based on comic books. Nobody who watched the cartoon knew that there was a comic book. Some of us were even babies when the comic book first came out. So we never truly knew it until we truly became big fans. And the other part that makes it even worse was it was really hard to get your hands on those old comics.
Well, that's any old comic, but I think that's kind of what gives this franchise its fuel to fire, because you have kind of, in a way, at the inception of this creation, two very different audiences. You have an adult audience who had been avid comic book readers in a very grungy, weird space. Before even the creation of the TMNT idea, you had, coming off the Cold War, you had the introduction of kind of this anarchy punk rock scene. And so you had these kind of grungy comic book enthusiasts that were looking for that gritty read. And then TMNT came in. It was a little bit whimsical, maybe a little bit more than what they anticipated, but it blew up. I think what happened in 84, when they had the creation of the collaboration with Playmate Toys, is they had to have a way to introduce it to kids. You can't introduce dark grit to kids. They're not going to get it. But now that that twofold side of things, you still have those original comic book readers who still to this day love what TMNT did for comic books. It was revolutionary. And then you have those kids, which is us in our generation, which we grew up on the toys, the cartoon, and we grew into the franchise at all of its different layers. And now, as comic book readers avidly, we can go back. And the beauty of comic books today is you get, these reimagined bind ups. You get the digital at our disposal where we can go back and finally see the first one. And we're never going to be able to hold the original in our hands, unfortunately, but this is just as good. And then you get, now we're at the 40th year. I just picked this up. This has kind of a different comic book for every generation of turtle fans. So things like this being available, I think, not only reminds us how we started and how far we've come, but it continues to fuel that passion that we have, and it reminds us why we love this franchise the way we do and why we do.
Yeah, and we've even seen. I mean, like, let me ask you a very serious question. Do we really want to talk about the next mutation?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, I will just say if there was anything that you could say that was a little bit of a bold move there was to introduce a fifth turtle in Venus de Milo, which I'm pretty sure, if I could obviously put money on it, I'm pretty sure that that is the reason why Jenica exists in the comic books.
Oh, it's possible. I don't know. That's probably the longest illusion I have when it comes to talking about this franchise with people. When I talk about Venus de Milo, they're like, "Who?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, the female turtle." There wasn't a female turtle.
Oh,
So
yes, there was.
in a way, it is a segue to kind of get people talking about it, but then also to discover her. That's actually one of the first conversations my husband and I had before we started dating. I started talking about the female turtle. I don't know why. It was just a nervous conversation. But it's a part of the history. There's certain elements of this. I mean, even like the 2012 cartoon, it took me a long time to appreciate that. I didn't like it when it first came out, but I think because I was such a diehard fan of the 87 version of it that you just couldn't get me out of that. But now, as an adult, looking back on it, that 2012 cartoon was very true to its characters and its comic origin,
That's the
So,
one that was originally done by Nickelodeon. Was that the one where
yes,
Rob? That was the one that
yes,
Rob Paulson was the voice of Donatello
yes,
and not
yes,
Raphael. And I
yes.
Jason Biggs was the voice of Leo for like the first 3 seasons.
I believe you are correct. Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, I think with this franchise, you just kind of have a love hate relationship. But I think that can be said with any franchise, though, Like, I couldn't stand Tommy Oliver when I first started watching Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, But over the inception, I saw he went from the Green Ranger to the White Ranger. And I was just like, oh man, this guy is really cool. And I grew to love him, He just was an intrusion when he first stepped on. I'm like, dude, I had a group of 5. Like, you are not this cool sixth ranger that just gets to come in and blow everything up, But he
Yeah.
ended up being mostly everybody's favorite ranger. My whole point in all this is I just think that there are a lot of elements that happen in a franchise, whether it be a movie, a cartoon, an introduction to a different character that maybe doesn't last the tell of time, that just is a try. Let's try this. Let's see if it works. Let's see if it gets people interested again.
And I think what's even more interesting is, though, even though it was Chaim Saban and Shuki Levy that pretty much destroyed the Ninja Turtles by the creation of Power Rangers, eventually Saban Entertainment would get the Ninja Turtles, and that's why we would have the next mutation, and we would even have that appearance of the Ninja Turtles in Power Rangers in Space, which, as far as I have heard, is the highest rated episode of Power Rangers in Space. The one where the Ninja Turtles actually are making an appearance in that Power Rangers episode.
That's a pretty epic episode. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know stats on the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, but that is another franchise that I'm a huge fan of. I don't have a lot of stats and details in my cranium because I have to save it for, other such things. But I do feel that that is an episode that is referenced by both franchises, both Mighty Morphin Power Ranger and TMNT lovers, and we can collectively agree that it is epic.
So yes, and as you said, all of a sudden you go to 2003 and the Turtles are back. Out of nowhere, they come back in a whole new animated series, a darker, grittier animated series, and yet familiar to fans of the 1980s show because you've still got those iconic colors, you've still got those iconic personalities, but it's done the way you would want it to be if you were a Turtles fan craving a great Ninja Turtles cartoon again. And then fast forward a few years later into 2007, you just brought something up to show the people. There was one specific thing that I wanted to show because it's so grossly underappreciated, and it's the Image Eye 2007 CGI film. This
That is
is
actually something you turned me on to.
this
You're
is
like, as
one
a
of my
Turtles fan, how have you
favorites.
not? Yes, I agree 100% on that one.
What I loved so much about this animated film was not only, you see, Image Eye is something that holds a place near and dear to my heart because it was an animation studio that had so much potential and it went bankrupt so quickly. But it was so upsetting to me because of the franchises that this company wanted to bring to the big screen. Because Ninja Turtles was the big experiment, The Turtles were literally coming back into popularity very, very recently. And we want to test and see what we could do with our CGI technology and animation. Let's make a Ninja Turtles film. I like that it is sort of a spiritual sequel done right to the original 1990 film.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also got an amazing voice cast. I mean, it's got Sir Patrick Stewart, it's got Chris Evans, it's got Sarah Michelle Gellar. It's a really good film. I really do enjoy it. The animation is a little crude, but this was a studio that was new and was trying to do something big because then they make their CGI film Astro Boy, which unfortunately bombs, and they're unable to bring any more of their projects out because they were planning on bringing Gatchaman back to popular culture in a CGI film. I still, to this day, I'll go on YouTube and watch the footage trailer that they showed at a Comic-Con, and it looked so great. I wish that there would have been a CGI Gatchaman movie. They were also planning on bringing a Gigantor movie to the masses, to bring these old anime franchises to the big screen for people to enjoy. Image Eye could have done so well as an animation studio, and just because of the fact that TMNT didn't do as well as they wanted it to, and Astro Boy completely flopped at the box office, we didn't see these great films. But the thing about TMNT was it was a sign that people were starting to get interested in this franchise again because the 2003 series lasted for 6 seasons, I believe, and it was very successful. So the fact that you had the new series and you had the TMNT film, all of a sudden the Turtles are starting to show up again. Like they literally are emerging out of the sewers again. And then there's rumors that there's going to be a new live action film. And the big announcement that the Ninja Turtles got bought by Nickelodeon, a powerhouse studio. And then you literally can just take that moment in time and bring it to where we are today. We'll obviously go into a few small additional things, but once they got taken by Nickelodeon, that was it. The Turtles were back.
Well, Nickelodeon is just quintessential for any 80s or 90s kid. I mean, that's just synonymous with all the households, for all of the different franchises. So putting TMNT and Nickelodeon together just made sense at the time. It gave it fresh eyes, a new audience, it gave it life, and it gave it some fun again.
Yeah. And I mean, I still remember when they were announcing the fact that Michael Bay was going to be producing the Turtles film, and how, do you remember when they were originally planning to change the whole origin story completely and that the Turtles were going to be aliens?
Yes. I was
I'm
like,
so glad
no.
they changed their minds.
That would have been an epic failure. I just, there's certain things that you can do in terms of tweaking an existing franchise But when you try to change the origin story, you really have to make sure you've got a fan base approval before you go all in on it, because you really stand to piss a lot of people off. And
Yeah.
I'm so glad they changed their mind. I love
And
aliens, but that would have been a horrible choice.
And there's even some decent people attached to this this new movie as well. I mean, look, I don't really care for Megan Fox. I'm not really the biggest fan of Will Arnett, but you got Johnny Knoxville in that movie. But what I really want now, here's the thing: I do not like the first movie, but I do like Ninja Turtles Back to the Shadows because I think Back to the Shadows went back to the roots of the old cartoon because you had Bebop and Rocksteady, you had Baxter Stockman, you had the Turtle Van, you had Krang in for a small second, and at the end of the movie, you get a new version of the TMNT theme song from the cartoon, and that's just freaking awesome. But
Yeah.
what I really liked about this version of the Turtles was how they wanted to go a little bit more of a step further in terms of personalities, and they even did that by giving them all different body types. Like Raph was the gargantuan muscle-bound dude, and Donnie was the skinny one with the Harry Potter glasses. I like that they gave them a little extra something, but the movies were, some people liked them and some people didn't. It was a mixed
But
bag.
I think that idea of kind of giving them different bodies and styles and stuff like that was really kind of a nod to the first line, the first wave of toys from Playmates in 1984. Because if you remember, the pigmentation of each turtle was just slightly different on the green. And then that's the first time we got the actual different color differentiation between them all having the red bandanas, you know? And so I think that that kind of, again, was a nod to the past, but a wave to the future. And I really enjoy it when creators do that, because they're not trying to say, this is my own. They're saying, hey, this obviously came from somewhere. It means something to the audience that's watching. So I'm going to give them a little something while I give them what my creation is. And I can appreciate that.
Yeah, and at this time, and also, we've already gotten, they didn't really celebrate 20th anniversary as much as they celebrated
No.
the 25th
That
anniversary.
was, I think, the lull between Eastman and Laird, though, because that was really the time that they were not talking at all. I mean, it really wasn't until they sat down at the table in 2014 at the, I think that was the inception of the 30th anniversary, and said, hey, I miss you, we got to do this again, you know. So I think that we didn't get and I really think that's also the push for the 30th, why we got so much love on the 30th, because not only did we get them joining forces again, but it was like, hey, we kind of dissed our fans at a really epic time. You know, we didn't give them anything for the last decade. So let's really give them something for the 30th, you know? And it was sad that we just kind of, as fans, we were just like, okay, it's 20 years, but.
But something for the 25th anniversary, at least we got Turtles Forever. We got that really fun
True.
movie.
That's
But
true.
you're absolutely right. Like once we got into the 2010s, that's really when things really started to pick up because that was when, like I said, once that Nickelodeon deal was done, the Turtles were relevant again. They had a brand new CGI television show which ran for I can't remember if it ran for 4 or 5 seasons, but it had a good run. They were starting to show up in so many other ways because we saw new action figures. That's also when we started seeing NECA really take hold
Yeah.
of the turtles and create so many different high quality figures of the turtles. I actually have the original 4 with the red bandanas. I love them.
I have
Um,
a Funko version of it.
yeah, and that's also the time. Yeah, and then also that's when Funko comes out, and Funko makes the Funko Pop Turtles and the Turtle Van and stuff like that. But we saw some other very interesting things come out at this time that were featured in the Turtles, and one of the things was the fact that Eastman and Laird, come across a comic book guy named Tom Waltz, and then they create a brand new Ninja Turtles comic, and it lasts 150 issues, which
And
is
I
the
am proud
long,
to say I own all 150 of those.
and that is the longest running Turtles comic in history.
Oh, that's good to know. I just did it because that was kind of the inception of my, oh, let me lock into yesteryear that I really wasn't a part of, and let me kind of, jump into the future. And so I jumped on that bandwagon, and I'm happy to say it was a completest effort. I got all
Yeah.
150.
I mean, a lot of people really didn't like where the story went when Eastman and Waltz left the book, especially the introduction of Jenica, because when Jenica came out, she basically became the main character in the book, and the turtles were like irrelevant.
No, and I agree with that. I don't like it when you have a side character that becomes the main character, especially when the focus should be on the original, turtles. But I do think the creation of her character was relevant. I also agree with the that part of the fan base that there shouldn't have been so much emphasis on her character, because what we were really wanting from that new collaboration is to take us back to what we didn't get to experience, take us back to the early days, show us what you're capable of, show us those gritty drawings again, show us this magic that you're capable of, and then to kind of deviate from that storyline was a little bit disheartening.
So I never read the new comic book line. Was it good as a
Oh
whole?
yeah, well, I might be biased, because I don't think there's any turtle comic that I've picked up in the last 7 years that I haven't just really enjoyed, for various reasons, and I could break them down, all the way, like I've stated earlier, to the modern day Saturday morning cartoon. Like for me, that particular series is a nod to the 87 cartoon. It just gives me those feelings, those vibes. When I read it, I can hear those voice actors
Yeah,
as
we'll
I'm
get
reading
into
the
that in just a
comic
little
book.
bit. Yeah,
But
and so yeah,
yeah, I think it was worth it. Honestly, I did. I walked away feeling very satisfied with that series.
and I mean at the same time, this is also the point where we're heading into like the 2015, 2016, we're actually past the 30th anniversary.
Mhm.
This is when we start seeing the turtles showing up in the craziest of ways, because you have James Tiny in the fourth writing Batman and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comic books. Like the turtles are crossing over in so many different ways. And I mean, in the last couple of years, we've seen the turtles team up with Stranger Things. And now we have the Turtles of Grayskull. So it's
I'm
like
telling you,
amazing.
the artwork on that series is phenomenal. If you are a fan of Grayskull and the whole franchise, you will absolutely love the artwork on some of these variant covers. I mean,
And
I'm not a huge fan of it, but I mean, like in terms of dedication to the original cartoon, but I'm telling you, this matchup is so cool.
yeah, and also the other major book that's coming out right now, and we'll get into the other one in just a second. But then there's also Saturday Morning Adventures. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Saturday Morning Adventures is right now one of the highest selling books out there right now. People absolutely love it. And you told us just now why it's so great. I don't read it, but I know it's a good book. I can tell it's a good book.
I mean, it is. There's absolutely zero complaints. I'm from the drawings, the coloration, the layout, everything about it is a nod to the 80s. It is everything you would want it to be, because you feel like a kid again. As soon as you see that cover, you get excited. You just want to plop down and read it cover to cover, because it's fun again, And I think that sometimes as an adult, we don't have to be super serious about our comic books. We can just enjoy the ride. And I think with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle franchise, that is an opportune time to do it, because you have so many different elements of this franchise that's been given to you. And if you do love the cartoon as much as I feel that we both do from the 80s, I think that this particular comic series is just like saying it's a big high five to us. Like, thanks for sticking around for 40 years. We hope you love this, and we do love this, because it is magical, and when you look at the pages, they're just so bright and so vivid, and it takes you back to a time when life wasn't so serious, but you're having a good time reading.
The other thing, we're also at a point in time in the world of comic books where creators and companies are diving back into these old cartoon series and trying to make comic books out of them. I mean, Dynamite Comics is firing on all cylinders with some of the books that came out literally in 2024. Space Ghost is a great book.
Yes.
Powerpuff Girls is a great book. Thundercats is a great book. I
Oh God,
can't
is it?
wait. I can't wait for Silverhawks to come out in January. That is,
Yes.
I'm like saying to myself, oh dear God, what's next? Please tell me SWAT Cats is next. I would love to read a SWAT Cats comic book. Johnny Quest just came out in August. Great comic book. So
Dick
the
Tracy.
nostalgia is in right now, and the Turtles basically paved the way for that.
Absolutely. I think that it's a really cool thing when you can take something as profound as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and you can integrate it into all these worlds and it still makes sense, you know? I mean, it's we just got the first issue this past Wednesday of the TMNT Naruto bind up, you know? And
Right, that too.
it's just it's crazy how many different ways we get our turtles now, and it's good too because again that kind of matchup where you have anime and or I don't know, is that anime or is it manga, because I only got the
Okay, so that's where if Shay was here, she'll be proud of me. So manga is the book form,
no,
anime
that
is
that I
yeah.
understand, but what I was saying is like for me, I wasn't introduced to Naruto until it came out on TV. So was it in book form before it was on
Yeah.
TV? That's what I was asking.
It was manga before anime.
Okay, so that's what I meant. I knew the difference between the two, but like the first time I was subjected to it was on television. It was that and Cowboy Bebop. Those were my first, and then I went into Dragon Ball Z. I didn't stay steadfast with it because the world of anime, it's always moving. I mean, if you don't keep up, you're gonna get lost. Before you know it, I mean, what we're like on 60th season of Pokemon now. So what I'm saying is, if you don't keep up, you're gonna get lost in the shuffle. So that's not something I gave a lot of my time to, but I can appreciate the fact that it is integrating the two worlds, and I think that's really cool to see it.
And there's still so much of the Ninja Turtles that have come out in the recent years that I still haven't even seen yet. Like I haven't watched that latest cartoon that came out. I mean, it looked a little too goofy for me. It looked like a little Steven Universe, if you will. But that's just my personal opinion on that. I haven't seen Mutant Mayhem. I've heard
That's fun.
excellent things about that movie, though. I
Yeah,
have to see it.
that is something I think you'll have a really good time with. That one surprised me, and I really enjoyed the characters and that particular adaptation of it.
Well, outside of the comic books, there were two things that happened in the last 5 years that made me so happy as a Ninja Turtles fan. One of them was Batman versus Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the animated film. That is such a great movie.
So
I
good.
want a sequel so badly. I really, really do. And I love Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, the video game. That is such a great video game because, oh, you want to talk about a nostalgic overload. The
Yeah.
fact that they got the surviving voice cast members to come back and voice the characters. Like I remember Andy over here at That's Comical, he has Shredder's Revenge. On my birthday, I think Haley was 1 at the time, so it was the year after she was born. She had just turned 1. Or no, I'm sorry. It was my 41st birthday. Haley was just born. And I just remember her, we put her in her little chair and she's actually like taking a nap in our basement. Andy and his wife and my wife are all in the basement and we're all playing Shredder's Revenge. I personally wanted to play Raphael so badly, even though Leo is my favorite turtle, because I just wanted to hear Rob Paulson talk to me. That's the only reason why I wanted to play that video game as Raph. And it was so much fun. Such a great video game. I will watch the walkthrough of it on YouTube just because it's such a great game.
No, I agree. It really is a nod again to the video game era of this franchise. And it's really cool that we were able to get the remaining voice actors to participate because it makes it that much more memorable and special.
Yeah, but then, the other interesting thing is, we talk about how you'd say Kevin Eastman and Laird and Peter Laird, and you think Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Well, you say the same thing when you think about IDW, the comic book company. Pretty much,
Absolutely.
they unfortunately are not doing so well. But if it wasn't for Ninja Turtles, they would already be gone. The fact that the Ninja Turtles are so successful right now, they're the reason that they're keeping this afloat and maybe to a certain degree beneath the trees where nobody sees. The last thing that I really wanted to talk about here is one of the major things that is related to the Ninja Turtles that everybody is talking about, because it was a book that took me by surprise. It was really a challenge for me to find the first printing of the first copy. It was like I kind of felt like I was looking for that Ninja Turtles book one in 1984. That was my TMNT number one. And that was Kevin Eastman, Peter Laird teaming up with Tim Waltz to give us a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comic unlike any other. And that was TMNT, The Last Ronin, the 5-issue miniseries that has really become a major staple in the TMNT lexicon. So much, in fact, that it spawned 2 sequel series and a greenlit live action rated R upcoming film. You can't get more excited and more appreciative of Eastman and Laird giving us a side of the Ninja Turtles that we had never seen before. And thanks to the writing of the two of them and Tom Waltz, such a brilliant, brilliant comic book. That
I
first
really think,
series.
I mean, for me, I haven't had the luxury of going back and reading the first comic book, but from the art style and the gritty color palette that the first issue had, and then when I really became like a huge comic book reader in the TMNT realm was the 2010 IDW series, which is now like 16 volumes deep. Because it goes into the historical element. I feel like the original comic book and the 2010 IDW, if they got together and had a baby, it would be The Last Ronin. I really feel like that's what came of it, because there's so much history, but it's like, I feel like it's the end of the history of what the IDW series did for us. It kind of just brought us to this very apocalyptic feeling, like what if, you know? And The Last Ronin is just so good, and I cannot wait to see the film adaptation, because if it's
It's
anything like the comic, it's just going to be butter in our mouth.
But you want to know what I love so much about The Last Ronin? What I love so much about it is that it's introduced us to a whole generation of characters. I mean, we have April and Casey's daughter. We now have a whole new TMNT team.
Yes.
That's what I love about it. Yi, Moja, Uno, and God, what's the name of the fourth one? I can't remember his name. I always forget his name. It's Odin. That's the fourth one.
Odin, there you go, there you go, there you go. No, yeah, I agree. I think that, again, a franchise needs to have a breath of fresh air. And I think that when you do something like this, and you are kind of paying homage to your fans of yesteryear, but you're giving a nod to the future, you're saying, hey, you know what? We can appreciate where you came from, but we have a new generation that's up and coming, and we need to give them something to remember, you know?
I still remember how the first Last Ronin series ended, where you see Casey basically telling this bowl of 4 turtles, I have so much to teach you. I never would have expected to actually get a series where we're actually going to see these 4 new turtles grow up. And I'm like, I want them to do so much more with them, because now they're on their first mission in The Last Ronin 2 Re-Evolution. But when that miniseries comes to an end, I'm going to say I want more of these. I want to see them really work on these characters, because I think they can be something truly special in the future.
Ever since I learned that Casey was mirrored after Kurt Russell, I can't look at him any other way than that gritty, like Chinatown style, you know? I love that that's what Eastman had in mind when he made Casey Jones. I just think that's super cool, because he really is the quintessential renegade, you know? But I do feel that we are going to get more from this franchise. I think we will definitely put that in a cement block once we see where the movie goes, because if the movie is a huge success, I mean, that almost guarantees we're going to get another, you know, 5-part series or whatever.
And it really is a re-evolution, because it's
Absolutely.
literally Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird giving birth to a whole new world. I mean, the only thing
Absolutely.
that
And
I'm
at the
hoping,
perfect
yeah,
time too, because it's apocalyptic. And I mean, with everything we have going on in our society right now, that is the exact type of grit and feel that we need, you know? And we are all of the age now. Well, I mean, his younger fans, the ones that he gave the cartoons to, the toys to, you know, we are at an age now where we can truly appreciate that gritty feel, you know. And I do still feel that it is a huge nod to his original fans, you know, that saying, hey, I'm taking it back to the original artwork style, and this one's for you.
yeah, and that's another thing I love about those books because there are some pages that you actually do see Kevin Eastman's drawings on there, which is wonderful. I mean, I know that Peter Laird was associated with the first Last Ronin book, but
Yes.
he's not attached to the other two series. I mean, the only thing that I'm hoping for is that he will stay on board for the next for the re-evolution. If this last Ronin film really is going to be successful, and I pray that it is, the sky is going to be the limit. Like we're gonna have so much to celebrate when the Ninja Turtles turn 50. Let's just say that.
I think the thing with Laird is we have to understand just what an introvert he is. And I think sometimes he just becomes very overwhelmed with the idea of fame and meeting people and going to Comic Cons and stuff like that. You know, I do think it's a lot for him. I think that's really Eastman's cup of tea because I had the privilege of meeting Eastman about 6 years ago. And I mean, he was just so in his element at that con. You know, he was just excited. There was a line of people waiting to see him, and he gave each person the same amount of enthusiasm, and he gave them the time that they wanted. I mean, most people are just like, here, let me sign it, you paid for this, okay, move on, I've got a line of people. Not Eastman, man. He would give you as much time as you wanted to talk to him. I've seen him just ham it up with kids. I've seen him look at people's tattoos. You know, I've seen him just sign a gambit of stuff, and that's humble. You know, when you can come this far into a franchise and still respect your fans and still appreciate the fact that we show up to these things and want to give us that time, I just think that's super cool, and I will always respect him for it. But in the same token, with the whole originality of why we brought this up, I respect Laird's privacy too. You know, if that's not his bag, that's okay. He still made TMNT what it is today. And when he chooses to show up, we'll be there to support him too. But I know that he's always in the shadows. You know, he's always rooting for this franchise because if there's anything you can say about Eastman and Laird, is that they love the TMNT Turtles. They love what they created. They have a huge passion for it. They have a huge dedication to it, but they also have a huge dedication to their fan base. They will always appreciate us, and they will always let us know that they do. And
And I
that's cool.
and I think what's really amazing right now, we're taking a look right now in 2024, 40 years. There's no Ninja Turtles movie out there right now. There's no Ninja Turtles TV series right now. There's some celebrations of the vintage Turtles video games with the brand new additions of Mona Lisa and Mondo Gecko into Shredder's Revenge.
Yeah.
But right now, where can you find the Turtles? You can find them back in the pages of comic books. Because right now, we are currently seeing the release of The Last Ronin 2 Re-Evolution. You got the Saturday Morning Adventures. Jason Aaron is right now writing the new incarnation of TMNT. I mean, they're already 3 issues in. For me, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I really don't know if I like it or don't like it. And on top of that, there is 2 other Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comic books in Night Watcher and Mutant Nation. So there's
Yep.
so much right now going on with the Turtles. It's just back where it started in the pages of comic books. And that's what makes me very happy.
It's funny when I picked up this new IDW 40th anniversary about 2 days after I bought it, because I bought it on New Comic Book Day. And Eastman had put out, because he has a website where he'll sign stuff, he put out this version of the book with like a signed print. And I made a comment on his Instagram, and he actually responded to me, which was super cool, because I was like, man, had I known this, I would have waited and not purchased it at my local comic book store. And then he's like, well, thank you for supporting your local comic book store, and I was just like, that's cool, like he can appreciate that I didn't buy it directly from him, but that I still supported my local comic book store.
Well, that's
So,
the thing. We have to support and celebrate our local comic book stores
oh,
because
absolutely.
I mean, like, I don't really know who's telling the truth in regards to where the comic book industry is right now in terms of Western comics. But as far as I can tell, there's so many amazing things out there and there's so many great things to read. And the good thing is the fact that the Turtles, even though we're nowhere near what Turtle Mania was in the early 90s, the fans are still screaming for stuff and we're still getting stuff. And like I said, it's just nice to know right now that where to find the turtles is right back to where it all began. That's what I really like for now.
And I think that with comics right now, I mean, we're really seeing the indie circuit. We're not going to see so much, I don't think, from DC and Marvel until they figure out which direction they're heading. I mean, we'll still get, the occasional storyline or whatever, but I think the excitement really lands in the hands of all these indie comic book companies because they are not only mass producing these things right now, but they're giving us a lot of variety. And I think that's what's kind of reinvigorating comic readers. I think there was a scare tactic that kind of was put out in the airwaves around 2020 when we really weren't sure where the publishing industry itself was going to go in terms of still printing things because, obviously we had a shipping, issue and all these things. But I think now that we've kind of bounced back from that a little bit, people are supporting their local comic book stores and they're going in droves and when I go to the comic book store I don't just buy like one or two comics. I mean, my pull list is pretty vast,
Mine too.
and it really is mostly indie. So I think that, and I am reading Night Watcher and I am reading TMNT and green black and white or whatever the heck it is.
Black, white, and
But
green.
okay, there we go. Well, I haven't started either of those series, but I do have all of the issues. But it's keeping the franchise alive. It's recreating readers of yesteryear and making new readers of today. And I think that's really powerful. And it just, as we're right on the verge of getting this visualization of what the Last Ronin is going to look like on screen, it's a good time to be a turtle fan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not going to get deeper into this, but you did mention that DC doesn't necessarily know where they're going. I think they know where they're going now. They just got them. I think they finally got the memo. The DC All In initiative has been off to a really good start.
I think when I made that comment, it was more like in the movie part of DC. I think that its fan base is a little bit shaky right now because we're really not sure what the future of DC looks like in terms of
Movies,
supporting it. But yeah, I just jumped in on the DC initiative. I wasn't going to do it because I was on the Blood Hunt initiative for Marvel, and that was so expensive. I
Oh
bought
God,
like
I
every
can't believe you
issue.
did that.
Well, because I haven't given a lot of love and time to Marvel, and I thought, you know what, this is a really bloody series, so let me just go all in on this. And so I did. Every facet, every corner of Blood Hunt, I picked up. When it came to DC All In, I had just come off maybe like a month and a half gap of not buying any Blood Hunt books, and I was like, oh, I can't do this again. Because my local comic book store owner, she was like, "Do you want me to put you on the list?" And I was like, no, I don't think so. And then New York Comic Con happened. Jim Lee like sold everything to everyone, and then now you can't even get a print of Batman #1 for All In. I think it's like on its seventh or eighth printing.
Absolute Batman #1.
Yeah. So
Yeah, that
I
was.
was like, well,
But
shoot.
listen. I read it. It's great.
Is it? Okay. Well, I'm still waiting on my
Batman,
like eighth
absolute
printing.
Superman, and absolute Wonder Woman, and there's something special there.
Well, good to know because I am on the pull list now. I was like, screw it. I'm going to regret this if I don't get on it. So I'll just get some back issues
We'll
that
talk about
unfortunately
stuff to
aren't
read.
first prints, but yeah, I mean, I think it's an exciting time for comic books.
I
I
think
think
so.
that whether you've been a fan as long as you have, or if you're still kind of a newbie like I am, I've been reading comic books avidly with you now for about 6 years, I think 5, 6
And
years.
it's been fun.
It's been so fun, and I
I
think
love it.
that I get excited because, like, oh my god, so my husband and I right now, we're watching The Big Bang Theory together because he's never seen it, and I
Oh,
wanted him
great.
to kinda understand my level of nerd, and so we had just started season 3, and season 3 episode, I think it was 1, there's a bet between Wolowitz and, Sheldon, and they're talking about putting up their prize comic book,
And one
and
of
the
them, I believe, is Flash issue 123.
yes, and the fact that I knew what those issues were tells you how far I've come in my reading. I was like, "Oh my god, I am at a whole new level of nerd with this episode."
Bravo.
Because the first time I watched it, I didn't know what the heck they were talking about, and I was like, "Oh wow, that's a really good issue. It's worth some money too." And then my husband looks at me, he's like, "You seriously know what they're talking about?" I was like, "Yeah,
It's
I
Flash of
do."
Two Worlds.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I could see the cover and everything. I was like, "Oh my god, I have come really far in my reading."
Bravo. Bravo, my
Thank you.
friend. Anyway, I think that's going to wrap it up. It's an exciting time to be a Turtle fan, as you said. So many great things. It's amazing to see where Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird have started and where they are right now. I just hope that right now, because the Turtles seem to be really back on top right now, or at least in every pop culture conversation, I'm just hoping that the two of them are just excited for what's to come because big things are happening. So thank you very much for watching, everybody. Leave a comment and subscribe. We'd love to talk to you. I know Cammy wants to talk your ear off about
I
Ninja
do.
Turtles, as
I
she
love
always
meeting
does.
turtle fans.
And we are going to still try and continue to celebrate. I think we got one more Ninja Turtles thing that we can actually fit into 2004. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest content because we are heading into the end of the year. We still have a little bit of celebration of Batman. And like I said, a little bit of TMNT to celebrate as well. In the meantime, we'll see you in the next one, guys.
Thanks for joining.